Queensland's child protection system is going under the microscope again. A new inquiry got underway this week with public hearings beginning in Brisbane. It's the third investigation in 14 years. First, there was the Ford inquiry in 1999. Headed up by the former Governor of Queensland, Leneen Ford, it investigated abuse in state-run and non-government institutions.
We can't have children being abused that are in state care. If you're going to give children to the state has to be a better parent.
A $100 million compensation fund was eventually set up for the victims to acknowledge their ongoing trauma. In 2004, the child protection system was making headlines again, this time over allegations of abuse and neglect in foster care. The Crime and Misconduct Commission concluded the current system had failed many children. It determined urgent reform was needed and made 110 recommendations for change.
There needs to be a new start in Queensland, and that can't happen with the present department.
The then Premier, Peter Beattie, took the CMC's blueprint to an election.
This is about putting children first. We've had enough delays, we've had enough agony, we've had enough pain for Queensland children.
It became an election issue again this year when Campbell Newman promised yet another inquiry. The former Queensland Crime Commission head, Tim Carmody, is overseeing this one. He has until April next year to review the current system and chart a new roadmap for the next 10 years.
What was implemented, what's worked, what hasn't worked, because as we've seen over the years in Queensland, former governments have just continually thrown money at this problem.
The first public hearings began in Brisbane this week, and there were some startling statistics. Someone keeping a very close eye on proceedings is Lindsay Wegener from Peak Care, the organisation which represents non-government child protection services. Mr Wegener, appreciate your time. You say the system is in crisis. Why?
Well, we heard during the inquiry this week that 23.8% of children in this state will be known to child safety services during the course of this year. That's unbelievable. It's unheard of that almost 1/4 of Queensland's population of children will be known to child safety because of concerns about child abuse and neglect. If that was an illness, we would be calling it an epidemic.
What do you want this inquiry to deliver?
Typically, inquiries have often come up with solutions that are really more of the same. We hear recommendations made about amendments to legislation or structural changes to government departments. We think this inquiry has some many more fundamental questions to ask. Questions such as, why are there this many families struggling with protecting their children? Why are this many families struggling with the idea of being able to safely care for their children? Unless we ask some of those very fundamental questions, we're going to have a system that's on a course for something that's completely unsustainable.
Previous governments have looked into this. There's been previous inquiries, hundreds of recommendations made, hundreds of millions of dollars spent. Why is this going to be any different?
Well, we're waiting to see whether it will be and are crossing our fingers that it will be. So certainly I think the difference is that there was no scandal that drove this inquiry, that it was the government legitimately asking the question, are we getting the best value for money out of that increased expenditure on child protection? So I think that does set up the inquiry in a better way than previous inquiries have been set up. So we're hopeful that the Commissioner will get to ask those very fundamental questions.
In your opinion, what is the key thing, the one thing that the government could really do to improve the system?
I think some of the starting off questions that increasingly the department is looking at intervening in the lives of families by asking the question, do we need to remove this child or not? The starting off question should be, what does this family and child need to live safely together? So we're starting off with the wrong questions being asked, I think. So in many ways, it's about asking families, what do you need? And coming up with the right services for them at the times when they need it.
Are you saying that there are too many cases being reported to the department?
There are, but at the same time, it's not dismissing the concerns that people have, it's providing the right response to those concerns. And so it's about going back to, well, what are the kind of responses that families need? And sometimes it's not a knock on the door by someone from a government department expressing concern about allegations being made to them. It's about intervening much earlier than that.
This inquiry is also going to look at resourcing issues. Are there enough child protection workers in the system?
I think that we certainly recognise that we're operating now in an environment where there's a lot of fiscal restraint. And I think that certainly the government is legitimate in asking questions, are we getting the best value for money out of the people that we've got employed? Our concern is that they can't shift resources from a tertiary end into prevention early intervention services, expecting that to change overnight, that there may be some initial investment that's required before the demand for those services reduces. So we'd be very concerned if there was a premature cutting of resources to those tertiary responses until those prevention early intervention services start to take effect.
Are you confident that can happen though? Because as you say, there is certainly an environment of budgetary constraint, of cost saving at the moment.
Well, we think that hopefully the government is well intentioned with what they're saying. We certainly will be wanting to hold them to account to come good with their words, and that certainly if they don't resource this properly, and then they will pay for it in the long term. That if we continue to do damage to children by the systems that are meant to protect them, then we will have more children entering into prison systems, into mental health systems and so on. So in the long term, the decisions that are made about children today are going to have a long-term impact into their adulthood. Unless we respond better when children are young, then we can expect that we will have a very expensive service to provide to them as adults.
Lindsay Wegner, thank you.
Thank you very much.